Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a really unsettling case from Houston back in the 60s. It's often called the Icebox Murders.
Yeah, it's a deeply perplexing one. And it all revolves around this figure, Charles Rogers. His background almost reads like fiction even before the murder.
Right, seismologist, pilot, supposedly brilliant, spoke, what, 7 languages? Served in WWII, Office of Naval Intelligence?
All that, and then somehow he becomes the only suspect named in the incredibly brutal killing and dismemberment of his own parents. And then he just vanishes.
Vanished the very day they were found. So for this deep dive, we're drawing on investigative articles, some reports on later investigations, different theories, and info from books about the case.
And our aim here is, to lay out the facts as we know them about Rogers, the crime itself, what happened right after, and then explore these really contrasting theories that have popped up over the years trying to explain it all. We want to help you kind of navigate the different layers of this whole mystery.
Okay, let's start with the man himself then, Charles Rogers. Who was he before everything went so wrong in June 1965?
Well, Charles Frederick Rogers, born 1921, his education was a bit unconventional. He dropped out of Texas A&M, but later got a Bachelor of Science, believe it or not, in nuclear physics from the University of Houston.
Nuclear physics, okay. And his military service. You mentioned Navy.
Yeah, Navy pilot in World War II, and then time with the Office of Naval Intelligence. So a pretty significant background there.
Definitely. Highly educated, intelligence experience. Not your typical profile leading up to something like this. What did he do after the war?
He worked as a seismologist for Shell Oil for about 9 years, and apparently he was very, very good at it. Had a real knack, they say, for finding oil, gas, even gold.
Really successful then.
Seemed like it. But then, pretty suddenly in 1957, he just quit. No real explanation given.
Just walked away. That's
Well,
interesting. Adds another layer. Did he have other skills or interests?
he did. We mentioned the languages. Also a big interest in ham radios. And this might be important later. In the mid-50s, he joined the Civil Air Patrol.
Okay.
And reports say that's where he first crossed paths with David Ferrie.
David Ferrie. That name definitely rings bells in connection with, well, other theories, particularly JFK-related ones.
Exactly. It's a connection that fuels some of the later speculation.
So fast forward to 1965, we have this highly intelligent, multi-skilled guy. He's been unemployed since 57, and he's living back home.
Yeah, living with his elderly parents in Houston's Montrose area at 1815 Driscoll Street. His father, Fred, was 81. His mother, Edwina, was 72. Charles himself was 43.
And living a reclusive life, is that right?
Extremely reclusive, by all accounts. So much so that some neighbors reportedly didn't even know he was living there.
Wow. And there were reports he communicated with his parents inside the house using notes?
Yeah, slipping notes under the door. It paints a picture of profound isolation. He'd supposedly leave before dawn, come back after dark, just avoiding all contact.
That sounds like a really strained, maybe deeply dysfunctional situation even before the tragedy.
It certainly suggests things were, well, not normal, which brings us, unfortunately, to the discovery of the murders.
How did that happen? It wasn't immediate, right?
No, it started pretty typically. Edwina's nephew, Marvin, got worried. He hadn't been able to reach his aunt for a few days, calls unanswered, so he asked the police to do a welfare check.
Standard procedure. So police arrive on June 23rd, 1965.
Correct. They knocked, got no answer, so they had to force their way into the house.
And inside, what was the initial scene like?
At first glance, apparently nothing seemed too out of place. The house wasn't obviously disturbed, no signs of a struggle in the main areas. There was even food out on the dining table.
Like a meal was interrupted or about to be eaten?
Something like that. But
Yeah.
then an officer went to the refrigerator.
And this is where the case gets its name.
This is it. He opened the door and saw, well, what he first thought was just neat stacks of meat. Washed, unwrapped meat, like someone had butchered a hog or something.
Oh, God. But it wasn't hog meat.
No, it was. As he looked closer, maybe closing the door, he saw them. Through the glass of the vegetable bin, 2 human heads.
Just unimaginable. Fred and Edwina Rogers.
Yes, and the meat stacked above.
Mm-hmm.
That was their limbs and torsos, dismembered.
Horrific. Absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
Was that all of them? In the fridge.
Not entirely. The investigation later found that their internal organs had been removed, cut up, and flushed down the toilet. They were recovered from a nearby sewer.
Flushed.
Yeah. And some other remains were apparently never found at all.
The level of violence and in calculation is staggering. What did the police investigation determine about how they died?
They figured the date of death was likely June 20th, 1965. which was Father's Day that year.
Father's Day.
Yeah. And the autopsy revealed some grim details. Fred Rogers, the father, had been bludgeoned to death with the claw hammer. And horrifically, his eyes had been gouged out and his genitals removed.
Just brutal. And Edwina?
Edwina had been beaten, but the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Execution style, they called it.
Different methods, both incredibly violent, and the dismemberment itself. Where did that happen?
Police believed it happened in the upstairs bathroom. And they noted that whoever did it seemed to have, quote, some knowledge of anatomy because of how cleanly it was done.
Chilling. And you mentioned the house seemed cleaned up?
Very cleaned up. Considering the violence involved, there was remarkably little blood found around the house, except for certain areas. It strongly suggested someone had thoroughly, almost obsessively, cleaned the scene afterwards.
So, a brutal crime followed by a meticulous cleanup. Did they find physical evidence pointing towards anyone?
They did find some blood evidence. Specifically, traces of blood leading towards Charles Rogers' bedroom.
Towards his room.
Yes. And inside his room, they found a keyhole saw. It was stained with blood.
The suspected weapon, or at least a weapon involved in the dismemberment, found in his room.
Seems likely. But the crucial thing, Charles Rogers wasn't there.
Gone. He disappeared that same day, June 23rd.
That's right. The day the police make the discovery, Charles Rogers is gone. A manhunt started immediately. They issued a warrant for him initially as a material witness.
Material witness, meaning they needed to talk to him urgently, figuring he must know something, even if they weren't charging him right away.
Exactly. He lived there. Evidence pointed to his room. They had to find him. But they never did.
Never found him, despite a major search.
Never. He completely vanished. No confirmed sightings, nothing definitive.
And eventually, years later,
He was declared legally dead in absentia. That was in July 1975, 10 years after the murders. But the case itself officially remains unsolved by Houston PD.
unsolved, but with one very clear missing suspect, Charles Rogers.
He's the only suspect ever publicly named in connection with the murders.
What happened to the house on Driscoll Street? The scene of it all.
It stood empty for quite a while. Apparently nobody wanted to buy it.
Sure.
A grim reminder. It was finally torn down in 1972. Much later, around 2000, condominiums were built on that lot.
So the physical house is gone, but the mystery, it lingers strongly.
Oh, absolutely. And with the main suspect gone and the case officially open, it just became this void that people have tried to fill with theories ever since.
Right, and the theories go in some pretty wild directions. Let's talk about one major strand of speculation, the one detailed in a book called The Man on the Grassy Knoll. Now, sources mention this book takes, let's say, significant liberties.
Yeah, described as having poetic license, attributed thought, and virtually non-existent sourcing.
Yeah.
But still, it put forward a very specific narrative.
Okay, acknowledging those caveats, what does this book claim about Charles Rogers?
It claims he wasn't just a former O&I guy, but an active CIA agent, deeply involved in covert ops.
And connects him directly to the JFK assassination.
Directly. The book alleges Rogers actually impersonated Lee Harvey Oswald down in Mexico City before the assassination.
Impersonated Oswald.
Wow. And that he was one of two shooters in Dealey Plaza. The other, according to this theory, being Charles Harrelson.
Woody Harrelson's father,
Mm-hmm.
who had his own controversial history.
The very same. And the theory doesn't stop there. It also claims Rogers, Harrelson, and another man, Chauncey Holt, were the quote-unquote three tramps arrested near the scene.
Okay, that's a massive conspiracy claim, placing Rogers right at the center.
Hmm.
Within that theory, why would he then brutally murder his parents?
The motive offered in that book is almost mundane by comparison. It suggests his mother, Edwina, had started tracking his numerous phone calls, potentially interfering with his supposed secret agent activities.
And his disappearance, according to this theory.
Simple evasion. He fled the country, specifically to Guatemala, and got away with it all.
So that's one end of the spectrum, CIA assassin involved in JFK. Now, there's another significant investigation conducted much closer to home by a Houston couple, Hugh and Martha Gardenier.
Right. Hugh was a forensic accountant. They spent years digging into this case, really immersing themselves in it.
And their conclusion about who committed the murders?
They landed firmly on Charles Rogers. They believed he did kill his parents. No conspiracy needed for that part.
Okay, so they agreed with the basic police suspicion, but they focused heavily on why, right? What was their proposed motive?
Their investigation painted a really dark picture of the family dynamics. They believed the murders weren't sudden, but actually planned by Charles for years. The motive, they argued, stemmed from severe, long-term abuse and financial exploitation.
Abuse. From whom?
Primarily from the father, Fred, whom they describe as abusive. But they characterized both parents as, quote, devious con artists.
Con artists. Doing what?
Hugh Gardinier, using his accounting background, apparently found evidence suggesting Fred was involved in illegal activities like bookmaking, gambling, maybe fraud, operating out of the family home. And the Gardiniers believe this pattern extended to Charles, with his parents systematically stealing large amounts of money from him, even into his adulthood.
So, a motive rooted in deep family dysfunction, resentment, and financial betrayal. That's a world away from CIA plots.
Completely different. It suggests Rogers wasn't just reclusive, but perhaps trapped in an exploitative and abusive home, leading to this ultimate violent reaction.
Did the Gardiniers address the CIA claims at all?
They did.
Huh.
They essentially dismissed the idea that Rogers was a full CIA operative, saying they found no actual evidence for it. But they did concede that given his work as a seismologist for Shell, it was plausible, even likely, that he had dealings with contractors or individuals who were connected to the CIA. So maybe not an agent himself, but possibly moving in circles that touched that world.
Interesting distinction. So, if they believed he killed his parents for these personal financial reasons, how did they explain his successful disappearance? How does someone just vanish?
Their theory was that he fled south, first to Mexico, like the other theory suggested. But they believe he got away and stayed hidden because he had help from powerful friends.
Powerful friends. From where?
Friends and contacts he'd made through his ham radio hobby, which connects people globally, and especially through his extensive work and contacts in the international oil and mining industries. These were fields where his skills were valuable and could provide cover and connections.
So, his own unique background and connections facilitated his escape, in their view. Not the CIA, but his professional network.
Exactly. And they even proposed an end to his story.
Oh. What did they think happened to him?
Their research led them to theorize he eventually made his way to Honduras, and there, years later, he was himself killed, possibly murdered, in some kind of dispute over wages with miners he was working with or overseeing.
A specific, rather ignominious end in Honduras. Quite different from vanishing into the covert world. Now, the Gardiniers presented their findings. How?
They wrote a novel called The Icebox Murders. It's generally described as fact-based fiction.
Meaning
It's built on their extensive research. Their conclusions about motive and escape are embedded in it, but it uses a fictional narrative structure to tell the story. So it's grounded in their investigation, but allows for storytelling elements, unlike, say, a dry report. It's presented differently than the JFK book, which faced heavier criticism for its sourcing.
Okay, so we have the horrific, undisputed crime. The main suspect vanishes without a trace. And then these two detailed yet completely divergent narratives trying to explain it all. One paints Rogers as a key player in a massive national conspiracy.
Right. Linked to JFK, CIA, the works.
The other paints him as a victim of long-term family abuse and financial exploitation, driven to murder, who then escapes using his legitimate professional network, only to meet a violent end in Central America.
It really shows how a lack of concrete answers about one person can splinter interpretations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both theories draw on known aspects of Rogers' life, his intelligence background, his seismology career, his reclusiveness, but spin them in totally different directions.
And neither is officially confirmed. The police case remains open, unsolved. Charles Rogers is still just gone.
Exactly.
Hmm?
The sources give us these plausible, detailed scenarios, but the actual truth of why he might have done it and where he went, that remains elusive.
It's those gruesome details, the dismemberment, the fridge, the cleanup, combined with the bizarre background of Rogers and his complete disappearance. That's what makes this case stick in your mind.
Absolutely. It's why it pops up in popular culture. You mentioned James Ellroy novels. The Criminal Podcast covered it. It just has all the elements of an enduring, deeply unsettling mystery.
It really is a compelling example of how a single crime can spawn decades of questions, investigations, theories. It pushes you, the listener, to weigh the evidence, consider the source, and think about what seems plausible when the definitive answer just isn't there.
You're looking at the known facts about Rogers. Brilliant, reclusive, connected maybe to intelligence, maybe to mining, and trying to fit them into the known facts of the crime. It's a puzzle with missing pieces.
So to recap, we have the brutal icebox murders in Houston, 1965. The immediate vanishing of the sole suspect, Charles Rogers, a man with a complex, impressive, and strange background. And then decades of speculation trying to fill the void, ranging from, well, deep family pathology to alleged involvement in huge national conspiracies.
A case where the official record stops. But the story, the questions, they just keep going.
Which leaves you with something to think about. Considering the case is officially unsolved, considering these very detailed but wildly different theories from investigators and authors, and the simple fact that Charles Rogers was never found, what scenario for his disappearance, his motive, his ultimate fate seems most plausible to you? It's a chilling question that still echoes today.